Hi, I'm Ed Highland, and today on Profiles, we're talking about the printing business and how high technology is taking a lesson from the past. Joining us is Ryan Burkhart, instructor of printmaking at the University of Central Florida and director of Flying Horse Editions. Welcome, Ryan. Thanks so much for coming by today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
First, tell us a little bit about Flying Horse, how it all came about and its association with the University of Central Florida.
Well, Flying Horse started in 1992, and it was started by Robert Rivers and Robert Reedy, both who are professors of art in the department. And it was originally started as a way to bring visiting artists in to work with our students, because it was important to get that influence and provide students with different opportunities for seeing expression in the arts. In 1996, Keith Francis joined our faculty, and he brought with him his printing equipment and expanded the notion of what we were publishing to include fine artist books. I joined the staff in 2001, and I've been continuing that tradition. So we publish mostly fine artist prints, but also artist books.
Now, most folks think in terms of printing as the newspaper type style, where you have massive printing presses and things are cranked out in a high volume kind of manner. But Flying Horse is very different than that. Give us some ideas of how you're combining some of the new technologies, but at the same time really keeping that flavor of the old world almost.
Well, really, Flying Horse is state-of-the-art technology for the 1500s. We're using a lot of techniques that were implemented by the Chinese through Gutenberg, including woodcuts, letterpress technology for printing text, as well as more contemporary processes such as lithography, which was invented in 1880, and silk screening, which, although an ancient process, really was developed more for industry in the 1920s in this country. However, we're bringing in state-of-the-art technology for today by implementing digital technologies, working with computers, working with image reproductions, photography elements that go through the computer, and combining them with these traditional methods.
Why do that? I mean, why take and if we have a perfectly good printing process where we can put it in a computer and have the computer print it out, why create wooden blocks and go through the process, the extra work, the labor-intensive effort there?
It is labor-intensive. However, it does give you some things that the desk jet printer cannot give to you. A lot of people are really starting to think of that as printing, actually. They're accustomed to, say, the new photo printers that they can take a digital snapshot on their camera, plug it into their computer, and print it out. However, those methods are not archival. Typically, those inks will begin to fade within 10 years or less, because they're not they're dye-based inks based upon vegetable dyes, and they're not true inks that are pigment-based that allow them to last longer. So one of the, on a practical level, these processes are archival for up to 500 years, rather. So what is being printed here literally is going to last for that long, if well cared for, possibly much longer than that. In addition, there's a certain aesthetic that goes with that. A lot of people will complain about how aesthetics have been impacted by digital technology. A good instance for this would be if you were to look at a book from, say, 100 years ago and to run your hand across it, you would feel the little divots from the text where it was impressed into the paper, versus today where if you were to get something that's printed on a DeskJet printer wet,
you just smear.
The ink smears, exactly. So there's a certain level of quality that can be achieved by implementing these processes. There's a reason that Gutenberg's press is still around.
Would this be considered art, an art unto itself? I mean, printing a book with that type of labor involved and that type of handwork where you have to actually carve the various blocks, I mean, is this a form of art as well?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, there's a high degree of skill that is necessary to even get something to print in succession and to print it well. Laying type by hand is an art that is definitely dying and being lost. There are very few people in the country that still know how to do that. I know our own President Hitt started out working in print shops and doing that in his younger days and working with those technologies. But who needs to do that anymore, right? You just pump it into a word processor and print it out, and everything is fine. However, the aesthetics of that, to go back to the artfulness, is really what gives something an extra special touch.
Now, can you work with someone? We talk about incorporating some of the modern techniques and such. Can you work with someone, say, at a distance, an artist perhaps, or a writer perhaps, and then combine the various elements here to come up with a collaborative work?
Yes, and we did that recently with a book that we published called Lonely Tylenol. We did this, it's a collaboration between David Humphrey, who is a painter in New York City, and Sharon Mesmer, who is a student of Allen Ginsberg, and she's a poet in New York City. I contacted David about doing a project via telephone, a nice technology for remote working, and he was interested in doing an artist book. He typically does large-scale paintings, 10, 15, 20 feet in one direction. And the idea of doing a book where he could have a sequence of images was very enticing to him. And he knew Sharon from having collaborated with her once before on an exhibition, called her up. And so we started to collaborate. He would send me images via the internet, and she would send me poetry via the internet, and we would talk about how we could put this into the book format. All three of us worked on Lonely Tylenol for a year, and put it together before we actually met in the flesh.
Now, once you have the work, the blocks cut and the collaborative effort, the words are there and the blocks are there, and you begin the process. Is it run off at that point much closer to the production techniques that were used, say, back in the 1500s? Is it a faster process, or do you have different types of process? Perhaps I'll say a special edition before you get to printing them for the masses, if you will.
Well, a large edition for us to run would be something along the lines of 80 books. So Lonely Tylenol has 72 pages, and it's an edition of 80. There are only 80 books in existence. They're all bound by hand. Larry Cooper is our binder, and he binds every single book by hand.
Now that's lost art too. I mean, you don't find hand binders anymore, do you?
Not many. And we have our own full-service bindery at the press, in addition to all the printing processes. The book itself was printed on a Vandercook proofing press, which was in industry the press that was used to proof pages for the newspaper before it went onto the large press, which would run the edition for the newspaper that day. The two of us, Larry and myself working, can print about 150 copies of any given text in about 2 hours to 3 hours time. Mm-hmm. So we can print a lot in terms of that. The imagery comes a lot slower. Making the silkscreen part of the book that we did, it took about maybe 8 hours to print one section. We print 125 copies of each thing to get our final edition of 80, because you lose a lot due to human error and mechanical error and so on and so forth.
And then what happens with a book that is, you ingest it into a computer and it prints it out, it's there, hopefully, unless the data's lost somewhere. But with your works, you have the blocks, you have all the elements there. Are those saved? Are those archived somehow?
They are archived. Actually, Flying Horses just joined the Rutgers Archive of Printmaking Studios at the Zimmerle Museum of Art in New Brunswick. And so now we actually have a museum which will take all of the excess plates or the leftover plates that occur from all of the productions that we do, and we'll archive them for posterity and academic and scholarly study.
So the book that was printed that you may have a copy of, you can actually see its origins, the actual plates or the actual
studies, studies for doing different images, the original proofs that were ran on the book and corrections that were made to them. Those are all part of the Zimmerle Museum.
Do you use a special paper for this as well?
We do. All the papers that we print on are archival up to 500 years, and they're all pulp-based cotton paper, rag papers.
Like they used to make back in the 1800s?
Well, like they still make. The papers we print on are manufactured in France. We use a lot of papers by Arches Cover. It's the same paper that Eng was drawing on in the 1800s.
Okay, but most of the paper we use, you or I might pick up, it's more the acid-based type that disintegrates after a short period of time.
That's correct. Yes, everything is archival, and that makes sense because most all of our projects are placed immediately into collections. They go into prominent museum collections as well as private collections.
Now, what does this specialized work, say putting together a book of poetry, what does something like that do in terms of cost? How is it accessible to the public, first of all? And if so, what does it do in terms of how much a volume may cost?
Well, it can be quite expensive for a book such as Lonely Tylenol. That book has recently started to sell, and it sells for $1,200 a copy. So a lot of those books are
But it's
going,
like buying a piece of art. I mean, it's not quite one of a kind, but it's one of 80.
That's correct. And in many cases, our books will increase dramatically in value. To give you an instance, William Wiley came here to do a book with the poet Michael Hannon in 1996. The book was called Pilgrim's Process, and Key Francis published this book through Flying Horse Editions. That book was selling for $750 at the time of its production, and it's now valued over $9,000 per copy.
But this isn't done primarily as an investment vehicle, I mean, for individuals. This is a preservation of art.
It's a preservation of art, it's a preservation of technique, but it also is a way of investing into contemporary leading artists for a lot of investors, mostly institutional. However, each copy that we do, we donate a copy of a print or a book to the university. So all of those copies are retained as being produced here and get the university's name out into all of those collections. Yale University recently purchased a copy of Lonely Tylenol, and every copy has University of Central Florida published this book at Flying Horse Editions.
Spreading the word in an art form, as
exactly.
it were. Let's talk a little bit about some of the modern techniques. You mentioned, yes, you do use computers and some of the laser techniques in our earlier discussion. How is it different? How is it the same? And what types of projects would you utilize for say incorporating laser techniques versus carving wooden blocks?
Well, it may be something that is just very intricate to cut, or it has a lot to do with remoteness. A lot of the times, and the major reason that the press was founded is still the reason that it works so well, and that is to bring artists here to work with our students and to have them interact with the students. However, a lot of these projects will take 3 years to develop, if not longer. So the technology in terms of working remotely with someone can be a great advantage. For instance, if someone wanted to, if an artist I was working with wanted to see how a drawing they had done would look as a woodcut, well, then they can email me the drawing. I can have that drawing turned into a wood block using a laser burning device that we have available through the Digital Imaging and Processing Lab. And then I can print a copy of that, send it to the artist, and then corrections can be made or suggestions can be made, and the natural flow of creativity can be greatly accelerated even without the artist being here.
Mm-hmm. Are there also books being printed utilizing the laser techniques as opposed to some of the other wooden block techniques?
Yes, and often they're combined. So really what we're starting to do, and what I'm interested in really happening, is a hybridization of traditional techniques with contemporary techniques where they start to come together. I think that in doing so, what we're starting to see is different sorts of aesthetic convergences occurring, where maybe an artist wants to use a particular font that they find on Apple, like an Apple computer, for instance. Well, I can turn that digitally through that process into a traditionally printed process. So you can see a contemporary font, which has squared off edges, looks pixelated, but when you run your hand across the page, it's going to feel like a Gutenberg Bible. And so we're starting to play around with those subtle little aesthetic points in order to greater increase the range of inflection that an artist might have in expressing himself or herself.
I was going to say, this is actually sounding like it's becoming a more integral part of the creative process. I mean, for the writer and for the illustrator, the ones who are coming together, it adds just still another element. Well, what can we do to make this better? Well, maybe here's a type of printing technique or a type of illustration or inks that we might use.
Most certainly. I mean, if you think about it, really the printing press was created for the highest of reasons and the lowest of reasons. It was created so that A, the Bible could be reproduced and put out and disseminated to the masses, and B, so that playing cards could be created. Before the printing press, if one wanted to play a game of poker, for instance, one had to draw their own deck of playing cards. After the printing press, with wood block technology, we could make multiple playing cards and their cost went down so people could have more pleasure and enjoyment from that. The same thing sort of holds true now. I think that we're seeing the computer being used for a tool. I mean, we can see it in its most, mundane sense being used to disseminate gossip from Hollywood, via the internet, but also certain things, and I would like to think that the productions and publications we're doing are more along the lines and quality of what I aspire to be along the lines and quality of what the Gutenberg Bible was, in terms of having a high range of aesthetics being placed into these publications and implementing those technologies, giving that artist choice to use what they want.
Now, we've been talking pretty much about books. Do you do other types of printing there at Flying Horse as well?
We do. We print fine artist limited editions. We print straightforward large scale and small scale woodcuts, lithographs, etchings, and silk screens.
Now, these individuals that come to you, maybe not necessarily university related, but someone who comes to you and says, I have this and I would like to have it printed, and
it doesn't actually work that way, no. Our artists come via solicitation, mine. The press is run under the auspices of private donors who donate money to allow us to operate our visiting artist program. Flying Horse Edition does not actually receive any funding whatsoever from the University of Central Florida. In fact, Flying Horse Editions does not actually own any equipment. All of the equipment that is used in the publication and production of our editions are owned by the faculty who work with Flying Horse Editions. So we have a board of directors, and I go out and I find artists who I think are doing the best work right now. And then I call them up and I ask them if they want to come and work. They send us a packet of materials. The board of directors overlooks that packet of materials, and then they select which artists will come and work with our students and produce an edition. We don't actually pay our artists to come and work, but we entice them by promising them half of the edition. Mm-hmm. So we work with traditional methods and combine them with those contemporary methods, but we're very much so based on the model of the collaborative print shop, which is a model that really gained prominence in the 1960s in this country with the advent of pop art. Because of pop art and its enticing usage of vernacular images, the collaborative print shop was a way for the famous artist, a la Andy Warhol, to come in and work with a technician and make an edition of silk screens, because it was democratic and people could afford that more than they could afford, say, a very high-priced painting by Andy Warhol. So that's pretty much in the spirit of how we operate. Our donors receive a copy of each edition that we produce in appreciation for their tax-deductible gift that they give every year in order to allow our visiting artist program to run. So really the editions are sort of an offshoot of the visiting artist program, and they are another way that the program enriches our collections and the experience of our students.
The students, that was the next point I wanted to pick up on, because really the students are key not only to helping you staff, from what I understand, and assist you in the production work, but also from the learning experience. I mean, they're getting exposure to artists who they might otherwise not get a chance to get that close to.
Yes, and that's a really important point, and the most important point. That's the reason that the press was founded, and it really is the central part of our mission. Because a lot of people aren't aware of contemporary artists and they don't really know. The analogy I would use is if you wanted to study film and you were working in a film school, and if Martin Scorsese could come in and just hang out with the students for 4 weeks and critique their films and talk to them, that would be an invaluable learning experience. And the experience we're giving our students with Flying Horse Press is paramount and equal to that, in terms of David Humphreys, I was telling you, was recently written up in Art in America as one of the 8 painters to watch in New York City. Well, David came down and spoke and lectured to our students and worked with them, and furthermore, he made some very good contacts with them, so that a couple of our graduates have left here, moved to New York City, and become his studio assistants, and now they are making progress in their own careers, working in galleries and working with artists there.
So getting a chance to actually work with and perhaps even move on with someone who's among the top artists in the country, was that experience there?
Easily, yes, and it's a very hands-on type of experience, and I think that artists certainly understand that. I mean, working in the studio is definitely something that causes you to get your hands dirty, and it's nice to have those artists be here in the studio with our students, looking at art that they're sometimes in the very middle of the process of making, and be able to make suggestions. All of our faculty here who work in the art department have international reputations, and they're actively showing. But getting a different point of view from a different region in the country, we've talked about New York, but we also have had artists from Northern Ireland, from Scotland, from LA, from San Francisco, from Texas, from really all over the world coming in, provides a different attitude and viewpoint, which is invaluable.
The collective artistic talents and such all coming together in one place, really.
Yeah, yeah.
And what would be next? I mean, in the commercial world, you think in terms of how many more books we can turn out, or doing as many different projects as we can. Kind of what's the next step when you're this specialized and this unique? I mean, do you plan to grow? Do you try and do more projects? Where do you go?
Well, as far as doing more projects, I think that for me, it's really a matter of quality over quantity. It's not something that we're really concerned about. All of the faculty who work with Flying Horse Press are instructors as well. I teach 3 classes. I'm actively exhibiting my own work. I just had a 2-person show not too long ago, and try to show my work as often as I can and make a lot of art. And in addition to all that, I'm the director of Flying Horse, and I do all of those things. So doing more than 4 projects a year, which is the typical amount that we do right now, would be very demanding unless I were to have more release time or something along those lines. So really it's more of a matter of focusing in on that quality and trying to give that experience to our students.
And other medium, perhaps, ceramics, any of those other elements at all involved? Obviously press means press when it comes to printing.
Well, we could use, we do consider doing sculptural sorts of additions, maybe something in ceramics, and that would require us to bring in other faculty to help us do that. And at this point, although it's been talked about, we're really focused in on the artist books and the artist prints. We want to do that as best as we possibly can. And it's starting to work. In the last 3 years, I've seen the recognition of what we're doing really increase. The Zimmerli Art Museum at Rutgers, I mentioned before, has started to collect everything that we do, goes automatically into their collections. The City Museum of Orlando collects from us, the Montgomery Museum of Art, the Asheville Museum of Art, Yale University, the New York City Public Library. All of our projects are being recognized on a national scale right now and being purchased by those museums and others that I just mentioned. So I feel that we've got a nice mixture for success, and really this isn't so much about money, even though the press does cover all of its expenses and operates independently of the university. It really does much more than that. It's not a business in the strictest sense of, I have to show a bottom line profit in order to keep existing. I just have to sort of make enough money to put more money back into doing the next project so that then our students benefit from it.
Is the maintenance level something that would be different than a standard press type of scenario? I mean, wood blocks, I mean, the dyes that you use, I don't know about inflation affecting those products as well, the paper costs, all of those things, are those, is it getting difficult to keep all those together? And like you say, it's not a money-making machine, but it's got to cover its costs. Is it getting more difficult to do that and create these little works of art each time you print one of these out?
They are expensive projects to produce, and there is no doubt about it. Paper costs do go up, ink costs stay about the same, or they have for a long time. But we have continued to grow in addition to public collections recognizing us, private donors who really do make up the bulk of what we do continue to donate. Our annual membership is $2,500 a year. We've increased our donations from a solid base of 10 members. We have 3 new members in 2004. And I'm hoping to have 3 or 4 more new members in 2005 who will donate and receive one of the fine publications that we do. And that is enough for us to sustain and keep the maintenance on the machines. All the maintenance we do ourselves, and it's not very expensive on those. So.
And is it difficult to get students? I mean, are there kids that are interested in making this a career? Because it is specialized.
It's difficult for me to keep my door closed. I have so many students knocking on the door, and they really want to come in and see what is going on. They're very fascinated with these artists coming in. They're very fascinated with the idea of publishing. And it's something that I think that we do incredibly well insofar as Most art schools are very focused on aesthetics. How do you be an artist? How do you make things? And that's an important issue, and it's certainly the central issue to an undergraduate education. However, the sad truth is that 5 to 10% of people who receive a Bachelor of Fine Arts will be practicing artists 5 years after they have that degree. And I think what Flying Horse does does so well is allow students to see a working model, a working business model for how to use the publishing industry to their advantage to get their work out there and to make a living off of it. They see an actual working partnership business that is making an impact on the national scene, and they can be a part of it. And it's very important.
That would be something special to work on a project, even in a small way, and see it end up in a museum somewhere or in a private collection, and know that it has not only value in a monetary sense, but also value in an artistic sense. It's recognized as being something special.
And our students get their name on everything we do. So when we print something, we usually print a sheet that accompanies this project describing how it was made. And I make sure that our students' name goes on each one of those things. So if it's in a museum and you go look at the project in a museum, it will say this project was printed by, Perry Angelora, who was a student who helped me recently do a project. And so his work is now in a museum.
And would you say details each step of the way that you're going with this?
It talks about how the project was made, the paper that it was printed on, the ink that it was printed with, the sequence of the printing, who edited the book, who bound the book, so on and so forth, or the print, or whatever was done to the project.
What's the next? We only have a few seconds left. Well, what's the next edition that we might see? Next work that's going to be coming out?
You're going to see an exciting print coming up from Karen Kuntz, who's an artist from Nebraska, who will be working with us at the end of January 2005.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming by and talking to us about Flying Horse Press.
Well, thank you for having me. It was wonderful to be here.
All right. And that's another edition of Profiles. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ed Highland. Until next time.